June 20th, 1944. USS Enterprise, Philippine Sea. The ice cream that shattered an empire. Lieutenant Junior Grade Saburo Kitamura of the Imperial Japanese Navy stood in the enlisted mess hall of the USS Enterprise, trembling. Not from fear, not from cold, not from the lingering shock of ditching his Zero into the Philippine Sea hours earlier, but from the impossible weight of the tray in his hands. Fried chicken, golden and glistening with grease, mashed potatoes, swimming in butter so rich it pooled at the edges, green beans, crisp and glistening with moisture, not the limp salted stems he'd choked down for months, white bread, real soft sliced bread, not the gray crumbling ration cakes issued to pilots before missions, apple pie, its lattice crust glazed with sugar, steam still curling from its edges. And beside it a tall glass of cold milk, condensation beating down the sides like dew on morning grass. Behind the counter, an American sailor, barely older than Kitamura himself, grease smudged on his cheek, cap askew, leaned forward with a tired sigh. "You want chocolate or vanilla?" Kitamura blinked. The question made no sense. Ice cream didn't exist on warships. It couldn't. Ice cream required refrigeration. Refrigeration required power. Power required space, weight, engineering, logistics, all things combat vessels sacrificed for guns, fuel, ammunition, armor. The Imperial Navy had rationed ice for medical use only. Even admirals didn't eat ice cream at sea. Not in wartime. Not ever. Yet here, on the deck of America's most battle-hardened carrier, fresh from the slaughter of the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where 43 Japanese airmen like him had been plucked from the water like discarded cigarette butts, the enemy was offering him a choice of frozen desserts. He had expected ropes, bullets, starvation, torture. Japanese propaganda had been explicit, drilled into every cadet, every pilot, every sailor from the moment they swore allegiance to the emperor. Americans were barbarians. They ate their prisoners. They delighted in suffering. They were soft, decadent, weak, but cruel. They would make you beg. They would make you scream. They would make you wish you died in the sky. Instead, medics had cleaned his burns with antiseptic that didn't sting like seawater. A corpsman had injected him with morphine, real American morphine, and whispered, "You're gonna be okay, buddy." And now, this. Chocolate or vanilla? The words looped in his mind like a broken phonograph record. Chocolate or vanilla? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Vanilla," he whispered. The sailor scooped it without ceremony, slapped it onto a waxed paper cup, handed it over. Kitamura took it. The cold seeped into his fingers. He lifted the spoon. The first bite was a revelation. Creamy. Sweet. Cold in a way that had nothing to do with death, with ocean depths, with hypothermia, but with comfort. With luxury. With a world he didn't know existed anymore. He ate in silence. Around him, American sailors laughed, joked, complained about the gravy being too thin, the pie crust too soggy, the milk not cold enough. Kitamura didn't speak, didn't move, didn't breathe. The ice cream melted faster than he could eat it. He didn't care. He was witnessing the collapse of everything he'd ever believed. The great unraveling. 35,000 witnesses to abundance. Saburo Kitamura was not alone. Over the course of the Pacific War, approximately 35,000 Japanese military personnel, pilots, sailors, submariners, infantrymen pulled from sinking ships or burning aircraft, would experience American naval captivity. And in that captivity, they would encounter something more devastating than bombs, more demoralizing than defeat. Abundance. Not just food, not just medicine, not just clean sheets or hot showers. Abundance as a system, abundance as philosophy, abundance as weapon. They discovered carriers where enlisted sailors ate better than Japanese admirals, where machinery turned seawater into drinking water by the hundreds of thousands of gallons per day, where ice cream machines churned continuously, even during combat alerts, where fresh bread was baked in quantities that could feed small towns, where mail arrived weekly, even in the middle of typhoons, where movies played on steel decks under starlight, where wounded enemies were treated with the same antibiotics reserved for American officers, where laundry was washed, dried, pressed, and returned twice a week, where men complained about the variety of dessert. These were not isolated luxuries. These were not propaganda tricks. These were the daily operational realities of the United States Navy at war, and they shattered the spiritual foundations of Japanese militarism more thoroughly than any kamikaze strike, any naval battle, any firebombing raid ever could. The mathematics of maritime abundance were calculated not in tonnage or horsepower, but in calories and capabilities. While Japanese sailors subsisted on 1,400 calories a day, when rations arrived at all, which was increasingly rare by 1944, American crews consumed 4,100 calories of varied, fresh, protein-rich food. While Japanese carriers hand-pumped aviation fuel through rusted pipes, American ships automated fueling, arming, feeding, repairing, laundering, baking, freezing, projecting, healing, and entertaining, all while underway, all while fighting. While the Imperial Navy prayed to the gods for divine winds, the U.S. Navy manufactured its own weather, with refrigeration, air conditioning, dehumidifiers, ice cream at sea, and hot coffee on demand. The transformation began the moment Japanese survivors were hauled aboard American vessels, dripping, bleeding, expecting death. Instead, they received towels, blankets, hot soup, morphine, questions about their injuries, apologies for the lack of donuts. Yes, donuts. Commander Fujita's coffee, the first sip of surrender. Commander Mitsuo Fujita, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, would later become a Christian minister in the United States. But in 1945, adrift in the Pacific after his reconnaissance plane was shot down, he was just another enemy officer awaiting execution. "They hauled me up like a caught fish," he wrote in his memoirs, "and I prepared for death." What he got instead was a medical officer with a stethoscope and a clipboard, and coffee. Real coffee. Hot, freshly brewed, with sugar and cream. "I hadn't tasted coffee since 1942, Fujita recalled. The sailor who handed it to me apologized that they were out of donuts. Out of donuts. The phrase echoed in his mind like a depth charge. His own men were eating leather belts boiled in seawater. His own pilots were fainting from malnutrition before takeoff. His own admirals were rationing rice. And here, on the deck of the USS Missouri, the enemy was apologizing for running out of donuts. Fujita sipped the coffee. It was bitter, sweet, rich, alive. He wept. Not from pain, not from fear, from the unbearable weight of realization. We were wrong. All of it was wrong. The Calorie War, Nutrition as Strategy. The Imperial Japanese Navy's own internal reports, captured after the war, tell a story of systematic starvation. By 1944, enlisted sailors received approximately 2,400 calories per day, if supply lines held, which they increasingly did not. Protein came primarily from fish, but only when ships could spare fuel for fishing nets. Vitamin deficiency was endemic. Beriberi, scurvy, night blindness, these were not exceptions. They were the norm. American naval rations, by contrast, were engineered for peak performance. Breakfast, eggs, bacon or sausage, toast, jam, coffee, juice. Lunch, roast beef sandwich, potato salad, coleslaw, milk or soda. Dinner, fried chicken or meatloaf, mashed potatoes, 2 vegetables, bread. Dessert, coffee. Snacks, fruit, candy, ice cream, peanuts, cookies. The Office of Naval Records shows that large carriers like the Enterprise or Essex served approximately 15,000 meals per day, with rotating menus to prevent monotony. Tuesday, roast beef with Yorkshire pudding. Thursday, fried chicken with biscuits and gravy. Sunday, baked ham with pineapple glaze, candied yams, green beans almondine. Japanese prisoners, accustomed to unchanging rice balls and pickled radish, could not comprehend this variety, let alone the quantity. Petty Officer Kazuo Sakamaki, captured after his midget submarine ran aground at Pearl Harbor, making him America's first Japanese POW, later wrote of his astonishment at American submarine facilities. The enemy submarines had showers with hot water. The crews slept in bunks with mattresses and clean sheets. They had a library of books and magazines. The mess hall had a coffee urn that never emptied. They lived better underwater than we lived on land. The ice cream factories, psychological warfare in dairy form. But nothing, not the coffee, not the bread, not the hot showers, delivered the psychological knockout blow like the ice cream machines. The Japanese Navy considered ice cream at sea a physical impossibility, a luxury no combat vessel could justify. Refrigeration space was reserved for medical supplies, ammunition, and engine parts, not dessert. Yet by 1943, the U.S. Navy operated floating ice cream factories. The USS Lexington, CV-16, had an onboard plant capable of producing 500 gallons of ice cream per day. Concrete barges were converted into dedicated ice cream production vessels, churning out 5,000 gallons per shift. When the Lexington was torpedoed off the Philippines in 1944 and began to list, sailors evacuating to other ships reportedly rescued the ice cream stocks before abandoning ship. Japanese prisoners watched, slack-jawed, as American damage control parties, exhausted from fighting fires, patching hull breaches, hauling wounded, were handed ice cream sundaes as battle rations. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Their nation, fighting for its very existence, couldn't provide basic nutrition to its frontline forces. The enemy, supposedly decadent and weak, gave ice cream to sailors during combat. Chief Petty Officer Yoshio Yamada, captured when his destroyer sank at Leyte Gulf, spent 3 days aboard the USS Iowa before being transferred to shore facilities. His smuggled diary, discovered decades later, recorded, "The battleship's crew eats in shifts, but the food never stops. They have machines that peel potatoes, slice bread, make ice. The kitchen runs 24 hours. They threw away more food after one meal than my entire ship received in weekly supplies." When I asked why they waste, the guard laughed and said, "It's not waste if you have unlimited supplies." The laundry that broke the spirit. The laundry facilities stunned Japanese prisoners accustomed to washing uniforms in seawater, then hanging them to dry on deck, salt-crusted, stiff, never truly clean. American carriers had industrial washing machines, dryers, pressing equipment. Enlisted sailors received clean uniforms twice weekly. Fresh water, precious beyond measure on Japanese ships, where men went weeks without bathing, flowed freely for showers, laundry, and cleaning. The evaporators on the USS Enterprise could produce 140,000 gallons of fresh water daily, more than the entire Japanese carrier force could produce combined. Movies, mail, and milkshakes, the soft power of democracy. Recreation facilities on American carriers seemed like impossible fiction to Japanese military minds. Ships had movie theaters, showing Hollywood films, Casablanca, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Bambi, projected onto bulkheads under the stars. Libraries, with thousands of books, fiction, nonfiction, technical manuals, comic books. Gymnasiums, with basketball courts, weight sets, boxing rings. Hobby shops, for woodworking, model building, leathercraft. The USS Enterprise newspaper, The Beam, was published daily at sea, featuring sports scores, comic strips, news from home, crossword puzzles, and shipboard gossip. Japanese carriers had meditation spaces, shrine rooms, places for silent prayer to the emperor. American carriers had soda fountains serving milkshakes. Lieutenant Commander Teichi Mita, captured after his Zero was shot down over Iwo Jima, spent 2 weeks aboard the USS Bunker Hill. He later testified to American interrogators. "Your enlisted sailors live better than our officers. They have radios in their quarters, photographs of girlfriends, packages from home with chocolate and cigarettes. They complain about food that would be a feast for Japanese admirals. One sailor threw away a candy bar because it had melted slightly. That candy bar represented more sugar than Japanese pilots saw in months. Medical miracles. Penicillin as propaganda. The medical facilities exposed another gulf. Japanese naval medicine focused on one goal: return the wounded to duty, regardless of condition. Amputations without anesthesia. Infections left to fester. Morphine reserved for officers. American sick bays treated enemies with the same advanced care as their own sailors. Operating theaters on carriers had X-ray machines, blood banks, surgical equipment, matching shore hospitals. Antibiotics, particularly penicillin, seemed like magic to Japanese medical personnel who watched infected wounds heal in days instead of killing in weeks. Pharmacist's mate second-class Robert Wagner, serving aboard the USS Intrepid, later recalled treating Japanese prisoners. They couldn't believe we'd waste medicine on enemies. One pilot with a badly infected leg wound kept trying to refuse treatment, saying, "Save it for Americans." I had to show him our medical stores, lockers full of sulfa, penicillin, morphine, to convince him we had plenty. He started crying. The machine shops that built victory. The repair facilities demonstrated American industrial supremacy at sea. Japanese ships limped back to homeland ports for any significant repair. A bent propeller shaft meant months in dry dock. American vessels fixed themselves while underway. Floating dry docks, repair ships, carrier machine shops that could manufacture replacement parts, rebuild engines, fabricate entirely new equipment. The USS Enterprise's machine shop could produce any part smaller than an airplane engine. The welding shop operated continuously. The electrical shop rewired systems while the ship fought. When kamikaze attacks intensified in 1945, Japanese pilots who survived crashes witnessed American damage control superiority firsthand. Ensign Ryuji Nagatsuka, rescued after his damaged Zero ditched near the USS Randolph, watched the carrier's crew repair kamikaze damage while conducting flight operations. They had foam that stopped fires instantly, pumps that removed water faster than it entered, metal plates that sealed holes while we watched. Teams worked with choreographed precision. No shouting, no confusion. They fixed in hours what would have sunk Japanese carriers. The bakeries, butcher shops, and steam kettles. The food production systems on American carriers defied Japanese comprehension. Bakeries produced 15,000 loaves of bread daily. Butcher shops processed whole beef carcasses stored in freezers larger than Japanese submarines. Ice machines produced tons of ice daily for food preservation and drinks. The galley on the USS Enterprise used more electricity than entire Japanese destroyers. Steam kettles could cook 300 gallons of soup simultaneously. Electric mixers, automatic dishwashers, mechanical potato peelers, handling tasks that required dozens of Japanese sailors. The supply ships, logistics as dominance. Supply ships revealed the final dimension of American abundance. Japanese naval units waited months for resupply, often receiving fractions of requested supplies. American fast carrier groups received supplies weekly, at sea. Fleet oilers transferred millions of gallons of fuel. Ammunition ships delivered tons of ordnance. Storeships brought fresh food, mail, replacement personnel, and luxury items. Lieutenant Minoru Tanaka watched underway replenishment from the brig of the USS Hornet. 3 ships came alongside simultaneously. Fuel lines to port, ammunition, high lines to starboard, helicopters delivering mail overhead. They transferred more supplies in 3 hours than Japanese carriers received in 3 months. The fresh food included lettuce, tomatoes, and fruit, real fruit. We were fighting for the emperor with empty stomachs while Americans ate salads at sea. The mail that won the war. The mail system particularly amazed Japanese prisoners who might receive 1 letter per year, if they were lucky. American sailors received mail weekly, even in combat zones. V-mail, Photographically reduced letters arrived by the thousands. Packages from home contained cookies, candy, books, records, photographs. The mail call, impossible for Japanese forces operating beyond homeland waters, maintained American morale through connection to home. Christmas, 1944, the feast that foretold defeat. Christmas 1944 provided the most profound psychological impact. Japanese prisoners aboard American vessels witnessed holiday celebrations that exceeded pre-war Japanese New Year feasts. Menus from the USS Enterprise, December 25, 1944. Roast turkey with stuffing, ham with pineapple glaze, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, 3 vegetables, fresh rolls, 3 pie varieties, ice cream, candy, nuts, coffee. Seaman First Class Hiroshi Nakamura, imprisoned aboard the USS Saratoga, wrote in a hidden diary, "The Americans celebrated their Christmas while we attacked them. Every sailor received presents from organizations at home: cigarettes, candy, books, razors. The mess hall was decorated with paper and lights. They sang songs and played music. They were happy. We were starving and dying for the emperor while our enemies celebrated with abundance. This was when I knew Japan had already lost." The Yamato spirit versus the ice cream machine. The revelation went beyond food to fundamental worldview. The Yamato Damashi. Japan's belief that spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantage crumbled against American industrial reality. Ensign Tetsuo Yamamoto, captured at Okinawa, later wrote, "We were taught Americans were soft, that their abundance made them weak. But I watched them fight fires for 12 hours, then eat ice cream, and return to battle. The abundance didn't weaken them, it sustained them. We were the weak ones, pretending spirit could replace food." On the statistics of surrender. By war's end, Japanese prisoners had witnessed impossibilities. Carriers producing fresh water from seawater, ice cream in the tropics, movies at sea, libraries in combat zones, hospitals afloat. Machine shops in battle. They had tasted foods most Japanese civilians never knew existed. Hamburgers, hot dogs, milkshakes, apple pie, chocolate cake. They had experienced democracy's abundance. Enlisted men eating officers' food, all races serving together, enemies receiving medical care. The return. Ambassadors of abundance. The return of Japanese prisoners after surrender spread these revelations throughout Japan. Former POWs became unwitting ambassadors of American abundance. Their testimonies, more powerful than any occupation propaganda, told of ships where sailors complained about food that Japanese would consider feasts, where ice cream was routine, where enlisted men lived better than Japanese nobility. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, the Pearl Harbor architect who experienced American abundance, converted to Christianity and became a missionary. His transformation, from architect of surprise attack to preacher of reconciliation, was rooted in that first cup of coffee aboard the USS Missouri. The Americans had every reason to hate me, to let me die. Instead, they gave me medical care, food, and dignity. This abundance of spirit was more powerful than any weapon. The numbers that told the truth. Statistical summary from U.S. Naval records. Daily caloric intake. U.S. Navy, 4,100 calories. IJN, 1,400 calories. Freshwater production, large U.S. carriers, 140,000 gallons daily. Ice cream production, USS Lexington, 500 gallons daily. Bread production, USS Enterprise, 15,000 loaves daily. Mail delivery, weekly, even in combat zones. Movie screenings, 2 to 3 different films weekly. Laundry, twice weekly. Clean uniforms, medical supplies. Full surgical capacity at sea. The ice cream that won the war. The Japanese prisoners who experienced American carrier abundance returned to a destroyed nation with a revolutionary message. The enemy's strength came not from cruelty but kindness, not from deprivation but abundance. Not from spirit, but logistics. Their testimonies helped prepare Japan for occupation and transformation. They had seen the future, and it tasted like chocolate ice cream served at sea during battle. The final transformation. The transformation of Japanese military personnel through exposure to American naval abundance represents one of history's most complete ideological reversals. Warriors who expected to die for the emperor instead lived to tell of American ice cream machines. Pilots who attempted suicide attacks were saved to witness democracy's casual plenty. Sailors trained for spiritual warfare discovered that material abundance sustained rather than corrupted fighting spirit. In the end, the ice cream machines on American carriers achieved what bombs could not: complete destruction of Japanese militarist mythology. The soft-serve machines that operated while ships burned, the fresh bread baked during battles, the medical care given to enemies. These revelations transformed Japanese understanding of American power and their own defeat. They returned to Japan not as defeated warriors, but as witnesses to abundance beyond imagination, carrying truths that would reshape their nation from militarist empire to democratic ally. The lesson, abundance as victory. The story reminds us that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through destruction, but demonstration. That abundance can be more powerful than arms. That the way a nation feeds its enemies reveals its true strength. The Japanese, who couldn't believe American carriers had ice cream machines, learned that democracy's greatest weapon was its ability to create plenty, even in war, share abundance, even with enemies, maintain humanity, even in battle's fury. And so, Lieutenant Junior Grade Saburo Kitamura ate his vanilla ice cream in silence. The spoon scraped the bottom of the cup. The mess hall buzzed around him. No one watched him. No one cared. He was just another survivor, another mouth to feed, another enemy treated like a human being. He set the cup down, looked at his hands. They weren't shaking anymore. He knew then what no propaganda, no emperor, no Bushido code could ever unteach him. Japan had already lost. Not on the battlefield, not in the skies, but here, in the mess hall, over ice cream. Hey, hey.